Hi, we're here today for Scholarships 101, Basics and Best Practices. This is for Kids Chance of America. My name is Kim Stazala. I'm known as the Scholarship Lady, and I've also been a consultant with Kids Chance of America for a few years to help define and promote best practices in the programs. Every Kids Chance state organization provides scholarships to the children of workers who've been seriously or fatally injured on the job. When a worker is seriously or fatally injured on the job, it doesn't just affect them, it affects their entire family. Here's some things to think about at the pre-application stage. We're going to go over financial aid terminology just to make sure that everybody understands how your private scholarships fit in the bigger picture. So first is the free application for federal student aid. The majority of students who attend college complete this application, which is issued online by the federal government, the U.S. Department of Education, specifically post-secondary ed. Cost of attendance is the complete package, everything it costs for a student to go to college, in addition to tuition and fees. So this includes room and board, travel expenses, miscellaneous personal care items, and sometimes a computer. So the cost of attendance is a much larger figure than just tuition. What many Kids Chance states are looking at is unmet need. So if a student has a large cost of attendance, let's say $50,000 a year, they want a few other scholarships, they're going to get a few other grants. Many of the states are looking at what is left. What does the student still owe to attend or meet that full cost of attendance? Next is the student aid report. Scholarship providers do not have direct access to a student's FAFSA information. What they have access to, if the student provides it to them, is the student aid report. It means after all the calculations are done by the federal government, what does the student aid report deduce from that? A figure that will be on the student aid report is the student aid index. This used to be called the expected family contribution. So if your state still has EFC or expected family contribution anywhere on your application, renewal materials, promotional language, you should probably update that to reflect student aid index. Student aid index can now be a negative number, whereas expected family contribution, if that figure was 0, you could be well assured that that student had significant financial need and was primarily a low income family. So now that student aid index can actually even be lower than 0, you will find out quite quickly who the neediest students are. Financial aid timelines are something else that Kids Chance state organizations and affiliates should be aware of. Again, because your financial aid, which is private financial aid, is mixing in with other types of financial aid. So federal financial aid policies vary depending on the type or intent of the aid. Primarily, is it need-based or merit-based? And Kids Chance of America scholarships were never originally intended to be for super high merit-based students or high academic achievers. This really was started as a need-based program. College financial aid officers have extensive rules to follow, and financial aid is a dynamic process. It's not a static process, and it can be frustrating sometimes as private scholarship providers to get different information at different times, and it might not seem like it makes sense to you, but if a student brings in another private scholarship in addition to your private scholarship, that changes their financial aid package. October 1st is the earliest a student can complete the FAFSA. January 1 is some colleges' admissions deadlines, or it might be their priority deadline. March 1, and again, maybe even earlier, is some college or even state financial aid deadlines or priority deadlines. April 1 is, generally speaking, the whole month of April is when award letters are going out to students. Financial aid offices are doing financial aid packaging if students need financial aid, and a lot of decisions are being made at that time. If your scholarship isn't determined by that April 1 date, chances are that financial aid package will have to be repackaged sometime later in the year. And then May 1 is National Candidate Reply Date. This really relies on the student. And if you work closely with students or can advocate with students, they really should respond to the colleges that they're considering with an affirmation if they're going to go to that college or not, because quite often, if it's a selective college, the college is waiting to see who responds by May 1. If the student doesn't respond, they're moving on to other candidates. So what can you do as a private scholarship provider? First of all, if you're trying to influence a student's final decision, you might offer a smaller scholarship and you might offer it later in the year. You're not really having an effect on their choice. If you have a larger scholarship and it's earlier in the year, you're then giving the student sort of that spending power to know, okay, I've got $4,000 a year or $5,000 a year. And that really can change whether a student decides to go to a less expensive institution or a more expensive institution. Kids Chance does recommend a minimum scholarship of $4,000 per year. That is based on your own average of about $4,600, but a lower average, a little over $2,000 for every scholarship student in the country. And that includes two-year schools, private schools, community colleges. So Kids Chance really believes that $4,000 a year is a good minimum. So the basic eligibility criteria is the recipient must be the dependent of a worker who suffered a serious injury, debilitating illness, or death while performing their job. The eligibility requirements that you put on top of that should not be cumbersome. And your eligibility and judging criteria should be aligned, meaning if you are putting in something in the application or the eligibility criteria that you're not actually judging, you should probably remove that. It's really helpful to use pre-qualifiers before completing an application where you're asking students, do you have this, this, this? What is your eligibility criteria? And if they don't meet those criteria, you can actually prevent them from wasting their time and wasting your time in reviewing an application. Also, do not impose eligibility criteria that would dissuade eligible applicants. So Kids Chance feels that states should not impose heavy community service requirements or heavy requirements about working in college so many hours. These students are already facing difficulties and technically would be considered a vulnerable student population. So adding additional burdens to them is not going to be helpful. Kids Chance also recommends flexibility, allowing part-time student status, especially after the pandemic when students are kind of piecing together a college experience versus what some people might consider a very traditional, straight out of high school, 4 or 5 years to get your bachelor's degree. That's just not the reality of how students enroll in college right now. Also allowing students who are already in college, maybe they didn't hear about your scholarship program right out of high school, but they're doing well, they're already in college, and they do meet the definition of eligibility. Another group is to consider those young adults going back to college. They probably won't hear about this at their high school because they're not there anymore, but maybe they heard about it through social media or your own efforts at recruiting those types of students. We also recommend that you allow gap years, especially we've learned through the pandemic, students took a year off and that might happen in the future as well. Also allowing deferment, which means it's a technical term about the money, that you're holding that money, if you will, and providing grace to the student and can release that money when they decide to go back to college. Part of all of this, of course, is finding kids and We recommend using a multi-tiered approach, not just relying on guidance counselors. Public schools, private schools have had a lot of turnover recently, and relying on one source of where you find kids puts your organization kind of at a vulnerable position. You might consider other membership associations related to the work that you do, unions, actual large employers, government agency, human resources departments, or even the human resources associations in your state. And then, of course, insurance convenings. We have examples from Maryland, Louisiana, and Nevada and Montana in the Kids Chance Best Practices Guide. In the case of Maryland, they make a Public Information Act request to get information about possible eligible families. Louisiana is embedded right in the Bar Association in Louisiana, so they have direct access to allies and advocates for the program. And then in Nevada and Montana, they were able to advocate to have, be able to share information directly with possible claimants. So those are just 3 examples that may be different in your state, but everybody is doing this multi-tiered or multi-layered approach. At minimum, we ask that you have a link to the Kids Chance of America Planning for the Future database right on your website. And then, of course, use your own creativity to figure out what will work in your state. At the application and selection stage, Kids Chance of America has several recommendations. First, streamline the application and renewal process. Some states ask over 100 questions of applicants that may or may not be necessary in order to make a decision, especially if your state awards every student that applies. At the renewal process, avoid asking students to tell their story. Again, you already have that information on the original application, and there's no need to re-traumatize the student. Kids Chance asks that you weigh need over merit or community service or recommendations. The scholarship program did not start as a high merit or high academic achievement program, nor did it start with any requirement for community service. Therefore, financial need is the most important factor. Allow cost of attendance, which means any legitimate cost as defined by the federal government, including tuition and beyond tuition, which means room and board. It could mean a personal computer, transportation, and miscellaneous expenses. If you're only using your scholarships for tuition, this may actually harm students that live in states that have tuition-free plans for lower income students, resulting in no net gain to the student. We also encourage you to allow flexibility in geography of where the students go to college, even if the claim was made in your state. Many states, again, have reciprocal tuition for the states surrounding them, and it might be a better choice for that student. Also look at the transparency and equity in the process. Do all of your scholarship judges have the same understanding? Do they all know what you're looking at? And we encourage using rubrics to help you determine scholarship amounts or how many scholarships you can give out, but also looking at a holistic review. Lastly, review that application on an annual basis to make sure it's current with scholarship best practices and even trends in financial aid. At minimum, these are some of the award communications you should have in your organization, which there are templates and examples provided in the Scholarship Best Practices Guide. So definitely that congratulations letter or email to the student. Separately, what are the terms, conditions, expectations for renewal, and the attestation that students should sign saying, yes, this information is accurate and true. If you showcase your students in any way, getting that publicity release and active consent is really important. Education records release or consent is becoming more important as universities have taken a more conservative viewpoint of sharing information with outside scholarship providers. And in fact, there is more federal guidance and policies around that. And then lastly, sending the college, university, or if it's a non-traditional program, sending an award letter with the payment, including those terms and conditions. Should it be paid out all at once? Should it be paid out twice a year? In other words, semester by semester, or even on a trimester basis. Next, if you're showcasing your students in any way publicly, we encourage consent-based strategies. So this student, for instance, from Kids Chance of Florida, signed a consent and agreed to have her photograph taken and a quote used. When you look at student publicity and engagement, it would be great to have students at fundraising events or industry gatherings, and just make sure again that they've agreed to do that without any pressure from you. You could feature them in your newsletter, your website, social media, but just make sure that they've agreed to do this. And if you're doing something on YouTube, photographs or even last names should be optional. You can pitch stories to different media outlets in your community, but be careful because some families really want to remain private and would take it as being intrusive if they were forced or too strongly encouraged to share their story. Kids Chance National has printed cards with student stories if you'd like to send those to any of your partners or leave them behind at a conference. You can also include students on advisory panels or even as board members. Student voice is really important, and if they can't give back financially, they can give back through this type of service. More popular over the years has become care packages and gift cards, graduation letters, and really helping the students understand that you're on their side and you can offer encouragement beyond the scholarship dollars. When you look at accountability in your organization, here's some minimums that Kids Chance of America is encouraging you to look at. How much money did you raise? How much was expended? What's the average scholarship? And what does that look like? Or does it change year over year? For those of you who are doing online applications, pay attention to how many students begin and complete the application, and then look for areas of improvement. Do you know what types of colleges, universities, or programs your students attend in aggregate? Is it 2-year, 4-year, public, private? This can help you determine a profile of your type of student. Looking at matriculation and graduation figures is really important, especially when it comes to fundraising and helping other potential donors know how your students are navigating through higher education. If you haven't looked at reasons for non-renewal, it might be worth it to reach a little further and ask students, if you have this scholarship, why are you not filling in the renewal form or coming back for the remainder of your funds? You might also ask, how did the student hear about Kids Chance, which would help you with your marketing efforts? And then lastly is the graduation survey. How has Kids Chance helped them? What is their career path? How would they rate the experience that they had with you? And are there possible areas for improvement? These and other best practices can be found in the Scholarship Best Practices Guide on the Kids Chance website. Kids Chance is now in 50 states, and we're curious, what will your program look like? What of these tips and best practices will you take as you implement the program in your state?